Hi, today we are going to start history with the very first lesson, how, when and where. Under this chapter, we will try to know actually what history is, what is history. Then we will also try to understand what is the importance of study of history. Why is it important to periodize the history into divisions, or why is it important to divide the history into periods? What is the importance of dates and what are the sources of the study of past? What are the sources of the study of history? This all we are going to study under this chapter, how, when and where. First of all, let us try to define history. History is the study of the past about changes, B, changes in the past, and C, relation of past with present. So history, it is the study of the past, the changes which occurred in the past, and then trying to relate how things have changed at present. That is, we try to relate the past events with the present and try to correct the mistakes which have been done in the past with the present situation. So this is all in the history. There was a time when history was synonymous with dates. Sometimes it is actually incorrect to fix precise dates to processes that happened over a period of time, because there is no precise date for any particular event. It occurs in a period of time. So it is totally incorrect to give a particular event a precise date. One cannot fix one single, for example, one cannot fix one single date when Britishers established their rule in India, or when the national movement started in India. No fixed date can be assigned to both these events, because both these events, they occurred over a period of time. So there was a time when history was an account of battles and big events. That's why history was only associated with the string of dates. That is, history was only synonymous with dates, because there was a time when it was only the account of the battles and big events. That is, historians, they only tried to give an account of big battles and big events. It was about rulers, about their policies. Historians, they wrote about the year in which the king was crowned, the year he married, the year he had a child, the year in which he fought war, and the year when he died, or the next heir succeeded the throne. So for events such as these, specific dates can be determined, but in histories such as these, debates about dates continue to be important. But for the string of events, for particular um uh, thing like a national movement or the coming of the Europeans to India, no fixed date can be assigned, as it was the string of events, or it didn't occur in a particular date but over a period of time. But now, as we have seen that history is no longer a study of dates, rather historians, they now write about host of other issues. They look at how people, they earn their livelihood, how they have a particular standard of life, what they produced in, and how cities developed, market developed, how new kingdoms were formed, how new ideas spread, and cultures and societies change. All this is now included in the ambit of history. So historians, they don't only uh, fix a particular date for the event and study history only on the chronology, or only as the chronology of the events according to the fixed date, but rather now historians, they take each and every aspect of the past, studying about how markets developed, how cities developed, what kind of livelihood the people at that time had, how kingdoms developed, ideas spread, how culture and art developed. All this now comes under the ambit of history. It's no longer the study of only particular dates. So by now we have come to know what is history. History, it is the study of past, the changes which occur in the past, and to correlate the past with the present. History is history was once synonymous with dates. Comparison of past with present lead to before and after. So when we compare past with present, these terms before and after comes to our mind. We cannot fix one particular date of any event, as the things in the past happened over a stretch of time. We can refer to a span of time and an approximate period over which changes became visible. Now the study of history is no longer the study of dates. Rather, historians now write about various other issues which were important at that time. Dates, they become vital because we focus on a particular set of events as important. If our focus or study changes, new issues, new set of dates will become significant. So dates, they became important because we focus on because on that particular date we focus about the particular events which were important. If the focus of our study changes, then naturally new issues will come up and a new set of dates will appear. For example, during British rule of each governor general was very important to them, because it was these governor generals who ultimately ruled the countries, the policies they perpetuated. These all were important for them. So British history, it was mainly the rules. It started with the rule of first governor general. First governor general, that is Warren Hastings, and it ended with last Viceroy of India, that is Lord Mountbatten. So for Britishers, what these governor generals were doing in India, how they were expanding uh, their empire in India, that all was important. So British history is divided into the rule of the from the rule of the first governor general till the rule of the last governor general, including all governor general from Hastings, Wellesley, Bentinck, Dalhousie, Canning, Lawrence, Lytton, Ripon, and so on. As the dates of these history books are linked to their personalities, to their activities, policy, achievement, it was as if there was nothing outside their lives that was important for us to know. So at that time, for Britishers, they felt that there was nothing as important as the rule of these governor generals, because ultimately they were the ultimate rulers of India at that time, who were expanding the British Empire. But if we do not focus on the rule of these governor generals and focus on the uh, life of the people at that time, then naturally the dates, the history uh, which we are writing will change. Now, if we focus on the activity of different groups and classes in Indian society within the format of this history of governor general, then uh, the division of the history would naturally change. The period would naturally change. All the history would naturally change. Now, when we write history, we try to divide history into chapters. Like Indian history, it is divided into ancient, medieval, and modern. So, why do we try to divide history into chapters? It is to give some kind of coherence, It is to give some time, some type of chronology, some type of step by step process, that yes, this was the first step, then this was the first step, and then this was the first step. It is to tell a story in a way which makes sense and it can be followed. In this process, we focus only on those events that help us to give shape to the history we are telling. The histories that revolve around the life of the British governor generals, the activities of Indians simply do not fit, they do not have space. So, if we are telling history in different ways, in different modes, then the history of the governor generals would not fix into the history which we are going to tell. Now, how do we periodize? How is history actually periodized? History is divided. This James Mill, he tried to divide the history into three parts. In his book, in 1870, James Mill, a Scottish economist and political philosopher, in his book, A History of British India, he divided history into three parts: Hindu, Muslim, and British. So, in 1817, James Mill, in his book History of British India, divided history into Hindu, Muslim, and British history. He considered this Hindu and Muslim period as the dark period and considered British period as the period of enlightenment for Indians. So, he considered that before the British came to India, Hindu and Muslim rulers uh, ruled the country. They were very backward. Religious intolerance, caste taboos, and superstitious practices dominated the society at that time. Mill felt that only Britishers could civilize India, and therefore, in fact, he suggested that British should conquer all the territories of India so as to ensure that people people come out of the dark ages, they are enlightened, they live in happiness. He believed that only British rule can bring happiness among Indians, as the British rule was capable of bringing progress in the society, political, social, economic progress in the society. But this kind of division was unacceptable. But such kind of division was unacceptable to the historians, to the Indian historians. So they tried to divide the society. So they divide to try the Indian history into three main classes, that is ancient, medieval, and modern. As this classification was unacceptable, so Indian history was divided into three main classes, that is ancient, medieval, and modern. So ancient history, right from the starting of civilization till the coming of the Muslims, is the ancient history. Medieval history is related to Muslim invasions, um, then establishment of Mughal Empire and rise of Marathas, that all is included in medieval history. And modern history, that is coming of Europeans, East India Company, and India's freedom struggle, it is all related to the modern history. Now, This kind of periodization is also not at all acceptable, because the historians, they believe that this kind of periodization is borrowed from the West, where modern period was associated with forces of modernity. In West, modern period was associated with forces of modernity. Modernity as uh, at that time, science, reason, democracy, liberty, equality, these kinds of terms were developing in European modern society. But since modern history, it is related to the struggle of the Indians against the British rule. So any kind of modernism in India was not there. Modernism was lacking in India. Democracy, liberty, freedom didn't had any meaning at that India. So this kind of periodization is also not acceptable, because um, modernity in India was lacking at that time. So the right term for this modern history can be colonial history. Instead of modern history, colonial history should be used, because no forces of modernity were there in India, because the Indians, they were under the British rule, and they uh, never perpetuated liberty, equality, or democracy in India, and under them there was lack of progress in every field. So dates, they become important because we focus on a particular day, set of events as important. If our focus of study changes, then new issues, new set of dates appear significant. For example, during British rule, rule of each Governor General was important. These histories begin with the rule of first Governor General and ended with the rule of the last Viceroy of India. Now, how do we periodize history? That is, we had studied in 1817. James Mill, in his book A History of British India, divided history into three periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British. He considered Hindu and Muslim period as a period which marked superstitions, religious intolerance, and all kind of caste taboos were there in the society, and he believed that only British rule can bring uh, good changes in the Indian society, and he even suggested that the Indians can become enlightened only when Britishers, they rule over India, and therefore more territories should be brought under the British rule. This kind of periodization was not at all acceptable to Indian historians. Therefore, they divided Indian history into three main parts, that is ancient, medieval, and modern. Ancient, right from the beginning of civilization till the coming of the Mughals in India. Medieval history, uh, in medieval history, started with the Mughal period, establishment of Mughal Empire and rise of Marathas. Then modern history is related to the coming of Europeans, establishment of East India Company, and India's freedom struggle. This kind of periodization is again not acceptable, because the historians, they believe that such kind of periodization is borrowed from the West, where modern period was associated with forces of modernization, that is progress in science, technology, in political, in terms of political development also, terms like democracy, liberty, equality were developing in modern European countries. But this kind of modernism lacked in India, because Britishers, they were ruling India, and there was hardly any kind of progress in India in terms of modernization. So this period is cannot be termed as modern period, rather this period should be termed as colonial period. Now let us know why history is divided into periods. History is divided into periods. First, to capture the characteristics of time, its features. Second, to reflect our idea of the past. And third, to see significance of change from one period to another. So history is divided into periods so that we can capture the characteristics of time of that period and to know the features of that particular period, to reflect our ideas of the past. We can get the ideas how the people lived at that time, what kind of ideas they have. We can make our own ideas that yes, this kind of society prevailed in the past period, to see significance of change from one period to another. That is when the one period got transformed into another period, or it got to another period, then what was the difference, what was the importance of change from one period to another, and what changes took place as the society moved from one period to another period. So this is all why this history is divided into periods. So we were talking about modern history in India can be termed as colonial history. Now what does colonial and colonization refers to? So modern period in India should be termed as colonial period. The period when Britishers came to India, the policies they perpetuated in India, what kind of rules they develop in India, this all we will study. This all is studied under colonial period. So how Britisher got control over the economy and society of India, collected revenue. They collected revenue, they got hold of the land. From there, they collected revenue to meet expenses. How imports and exports at that time was, trade relations was there. How they produced crops they needed for export. This all we will study, and we will also study about the changes the Britishers brought in India in terms of values and taste, customs and practices. This all is included in modern history, which we will study right now after this chapter. And now what does actually colonization actually mean? When the subjugation of one country by another leads to social, economic and political changes in the country, it is known as colonization. When one country rules over another country, and as a result of its rule, certain kind of political, economic, cultural changes are brought in a country, because the blending of cultures take place, and blending of ideas also take place. So all kind of changes occur, that is known as colonization. So when one country then the subjugation of one country by another leads to political, economic, social and cultural changes, then it is termed as colonization, which occurred in India. All kind of changes occurred in India because of British rule. We had adopted so many of their social, cultural, economic and political ideas. So now let's have a quick recap of what we have studied till now. We have studied the definition of history, which means the study of the past. We had also studied that history was earlier synonymous with dates, which is no longer synonymous with dates. Right now, historians they include everything in the preview of history, right from the cultural activities which took place in the past, how people earned their livelihood, how cities developed, how markets came up, and so on. Dates they become vital because we focus on a particular set of events important. If our focus of study changes, new issues come up. For example, during British rule, rule of governor general were important, but if we change the focus from the rule of governor generals to how people live, what kind of activities they did, or how what was the social and political life of the people under British rule, naturally the periodization or the writing of the history would be in different aspect. History is divided into periods to capture the characteristics of time, its features, to reflect our ideas of the past, to see significance of change from past to present, from one period to another. We had also studied that many historians they have tried to periodize the history into different periods, like James Mill. He tried to periodize history into medieval, into Hindu, Muslim, and this British history. Hindu and Muslim history were related to the history where no kind of progress took place in the society. It was marked as the dark period in the Indian history, but the British history was marked by him as the enlightened period, when Britishers brought many kind of changes, good changes in the country. That's what he felt. This kind of periodization was not acceptable to Indian historians. Therefore, they divided the history into three periods: ancient, medieval, modern. Again, the modern history term is taken from the Europeans, which does not fit into Indian context. That's why modern history in India can be termed as colonial history. When Britishers they came to India, and the kind of changes they brought in India, that is all studied in the preview of colonial history. Then with this came the term colonization, which means when one country subjugates the another country, the kind of changes which occur uh, in that country, whether social, political, economic, or cultural, that refers to colonization. And right now it is time to progress. Check your progress through these questions. First, define history. Second, why is history divided into periods, that we had already discussed. And then define colonization, that also we have already discussed. So by these three questions, you can easily make out what you had understood through this lesson. Thank you.